I see two chairs. I won't be using one of them, I think, because I got a bit of a thing on the set of never sitting down, so I've never really got over that. But thanks very much for that lovely introduction. And you're probably right, John. There's a cruel rumor going around that I wanted to present this film because my 8-year-old wanted so many tickets to Comic-Con that I had to do something to make up for it. That is not true. Although he was fantastic today when he took on the head of Marvel Comics and debated some of the pros and cons of what should happen with the company in the future. So I was quite proud of him about that. I did it for a very particular reason. John touched upon it. But when I was very, very young, I guess I was about 20, I was doing all sorts of devised theatre in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Australia. And this guy that we'd known about, who was kind of a legend for us, this director that we'd heard about, who'd gone to England, and at the age of 22, can you imagine it, worked with a composer called Andrew Lloyd Webber, made a musical called Jesus Christ Superstar at the age of 22. And he'd gone on to great success. And he'd had his own theatre company, done the original productions of Hair, and made a film called The Rocky Horror Picture Show. This director's name was Jim Sharman, and he worked with a designer called Brian Thompson. And he was a bit of a mystery guy. Anyway, one day he came out of the audience in a small place called Rockhampton and said, he sort of spoke like that, you know, Baz Luhrmann. You could never really understand what Jim was saying. And he was really, yeah, well, I want to come and maybe work with the opera and do some things with the Australian Opera Company. And I was like, that would be good. I would be happy to do that. And from there, he supported my own directorial journey all the way through to where we are today. More interesting, or even more serendipitous, many years later, after I'd done my first theatre productions and was moving into making a theatre company, I hooked up with a young designer from the same drama school I went to called Catherine Martin. And she was guided by a designer who was Brian Thompson, who also designed the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The tag there is that I married her, and she went on to work with me on all the productions we've done. She's kind of difficult to live with. She has 4 Oscars, and it's very difficult to look at someone who slams them down every breakfast like that, and then eats a Wheaties. Just saying, as my daughter likes to say. Anyway, just really quickly, because I wanted to do a bit of a preamble before I brought on what I think is a pretty exceptional part of the evening. I wanted to just acknowledge Jim and I wanted to acknowledge him here, because what I understood was that Jim went on, and he did the musical, and then he did had a little theatre company, and he told me in the theatre company, he had this guy that had a little band, and there was a drummer in the band who was terrible, like an absolutely hopeless musician and an even worse drummer, but he was pretty good. He said he wanted to write plays, and he wrote a play called The Unseen Hand, and his name was Sam Shepard. And yeah, some of you acknowledge that because he's a pretty good playwright, really. So then, after The Unseen Hand, it starred a guy called Richard O'Brien, and he had this musical idea, and they're at the Royal Court, and they go upstairs, and they put on this funny little show called, which was a sort of musical send-up of early comics and horror films and Hammer horror films with musical numbers, but it was also sort of confronting issues that there were big deals, like, you know, sexuality, but in a kind of ironic camp way. They did the show at the Royal Court. It was a great success. They wanted to put it in a theatre. They couldn't find a theatre, so they put it into a cinema. So it became the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And then at some point, they went on to make the movie. Short note, they made the movie, and a man bought 20th Century Fox. I think his name was Bloodhorn. And he said, you know, screaming every movie we've ever made here. And he got to the Rocky Horror Picture Show 10 minutes, and he said, stop, burn that thing. No one should ever see that movie again. So the young guy went, you sure? I mean, it's kind of, no, burn it. I mean, really. I just spent $100 million buying his place, I can say burn it. So the kid takes the reel and he goes down to the archives and he puts it in and he goes, So he waits about a year and he screens it around the corner at 12 o'clock at night. Today as I stand here, it's the longest running motion picture in history. Whoever that young man was, thank you. Because generation after generation after generation has been affected by that unusual, extraordinary alchemy that is both cinema and theatre. And it was a great influence on us. Now, the generations that have been affected because of the extraordinary qualities of it. And nobody, I can tell you a bit about it because it's kind of historical for me, but only the people that were really there could really tell you about it. And when I said, look, would it be alright if I hosted a Rocky screening, I had no idea that we would be so lucky as to have not only a cast member, but I think one of the great actors in the world. And so this would be a moment, I think, to welcome the great Susan Sarandon to the stage. Well, you're here, I'll sit with you.
Oh, thanks. Here we are.
You know, maybe I should ask you a question, Susan, because I've been dying to ask you this. But when did you first ever hear about the Rocky Horror, the play? When did you hear about the play as opposed to the movie?
A friend of mine was cast in the show that the theater company in LA. And so what happened was I went to see her in it. Jamie Donnelly is her name. And I think when Tim came out on stage, it was one of the most unique and electrifying moments that had ever occurred in musicals as far as I was concerned. And I met Tim and I became friends, and actually I went by to say hi to him at one point when they were casting the movie, and I always had this phobia about trying to sing. I mean, I just am so, my dad was a band singer, and I was always told that I could not sing, and my ego was such that I believed that and was terrified. And I remember when I came to New York, for some reason, going up for musicals, just nothing would come out. So anyway, I went to say hi to Tim, and then they were casting, and I just came to say hi, you know, give them a little peck and leave. And I said, oh my God, what a great idea. We've never had anybody that could make this part funny. Would you read? And I said, yeah, but I can't really sing. And so, well, just read it. And I read it, and I kind of did a, you know, like an extreme version of every ingenue that I've been playing up until then. That had some kind of inner anger that was really underneath the bitch, you know, but she was this little ingenue. And they thought, oh, that's so funny, go ahead, you can't hit. I said, can you hit this on the piano, Richard Hartley? Can you hit that? Can you just, you know? They said, please do it. And I was actually supposed to do something else, and of course you can imagine my agents were horrified. But I thought, you know, nobody should spend their entire adult life terrified to even hum. You know, I'll go there, they'll give me drugs or alcohol or something, and I'll get over this, and it'll be very therapeutic, and meanwhile I can hang out with Tim and Nell and all these great people. They didn't give me any of those things, and luckily we spent a lot of time getting the music down ahead of time, and I just apologized throughout the entire process, constantly. And I was the only one that had done film work at that point. Everyone else had done the stage version in many places, but nobody had done film, and Jim hadn't directed a film, I don't think, right? Yeah. And we were in this really uncomfortable, freezing studio in London, outside of London, more than an hour outside of London and commuting. And it was a very, very inexpensive, $1 million they spent to make that. And so it was kind of like the outward bound of filmmaking, you know. And I thought gee, the English are really tough, you know, work in freezing weather in underwear and they don't complain. And then I got pneumonia. Anyway, it was a hard shoot. And when I look at it now, I think, we had more fun than I remember. But it was great to work with Tim, but it was Edna and Richard. But it was fast and furious and very, very physically demanding.
You know, Susan, I'm thinking, and I'll just ask a second question, because I know what we're dying to do is really hear from all of you and questions you have. But one that's been rattling around in my mind, as I was on my way here, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she has a niece, I told you, and the niece is the same age, and completely unprompted, I was coming and she said, oh, you know, she's a little bit hipper than she might be 11, my daughter might be 10, I don't know, I'm not good with numbers, ask the studio, but, you know. Huh?
It's her cousin, not her niece.
Yeah, that would be my wife saying that. She just tends to hang around and side coach me. It's not just numbers I'm a problem with too, it's kind of like blood relatives, you know. But anyway, some vague blood relative who's about 11. But she said to me, seriously, she said, look, I'm going to go and see my favourite film. And I said, what is that? She said, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. She had no idea, had any connection with it whatsoever. Right? And I wondered whether you had an opinion, so many generations connect with the film. What is the enduring power that the film has upon the young and continuing generations? Why does it do that?
Don't dream it, be it, I think, is it. You know, at a time when you feel, I don't know anyone that feels like they're in the center of things at that age. You know, you always feel like an outsider. Everybody, even, you know, in hindsight, the kids that you thought were peaking at 13 probably felt as horrified as you did. It's such a hard thing to get through. And I didn't think of that when we were doing it, but the fan mail and the responses and the stories that I get of people either embracing their, you know, whatever about them is special and at the same time therefore alienates other people, or whether or not there's some kind of, you know, fluidity in terms of gender, or whether or not it's that you're in a place that you feel is really controlling and, you know, restricting. Somehow the Rocky Horror Show, there was a community, especially in the beginning, a really strong community of people that would go and see lots of other kids that accept it. It's kind of like the junior Burning Man, you know, anybody that came was accepted, and you could dress up and throw things at the screen and answer, and it's kind of like a mass or something. But it definitely, I was saying to Baz that later on I got mail from people after Thelma and Louise saying, Rocky Horror Show really awakened me and gave me strength, but after I saw Thelma and Louise, I left town. I thought that was really, you know, I never would have thought of the connection of those two films, but Thelma and Louise saying, you know, don't settle. But I guess the thing that kind of set it up was Rocky Horror Show. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. Halloween all the time. So I guess that's it, you know, that it's still so popular and that people like it.
I mean, I think it's true. I see it in my young blood relative. I made the mistake again. Who wants to hear a voice coming out of the darkness? You got it wrong. She's your niece, and she's 13. But I think that is true. I think for me, but for that young girl, I can see her evolving like that, and she's going, who am I, what am I, and that film in a musical, ironic, fun, inclusive way allows everyone to join the club of it's okay to be different and weird and out there in a kind of wacky musical horror film, you know. Do you think this is a good moment for us to ask people in the audience to ask us questions?
Absolutely. I'm always interested in questions from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, is there anyone who has a question?